Welcome back to the deep dive. We spent some time already, digging into lexical scope, block scope, and that whole principle of least exposure PO idea.
Yeah, keeping things tidy.
Exactly. But today, we're moving up a level. We're tackling what many folks find, well, maybe the trickiest concept in JavaScript, closure.
Ah, yes. Closure. It sounds intimidating, maybe.
It really can. But it's absolutely fundamental for building like efficient modern JS. So we're diving straight into chapter 7 of You Don't Know JS Yet to really pull closure apart, what it is, how we actually see it working, and why it's definitely not just some random side effect.
Yeah, our mission here is basically to make closure less scary. It's honestly the key tool for structuring programs well. You mentioned PROL, right? Limiting access.
Hmm.
Closure kind of builds on that. It lets us wrap up variables, keep them local, but still gives specific inner functions access, often like way after the original scope seems to have disappeared.
Okay, so if lexical scope locks variables in a vault, closure is like giving a special key to an inner function, a key that works even after the main vault guard, the outer function,
Yeah.
has like gone home.
That's a great way to put it. And seriously, if you've ever written even a simple callback function, one that uses a variable from outside its own little definition, you've used closure, you just might not have called it that.
Huh. Okay, so it's already happening under the hood a lot.
Oh, constantly. It's the mechanism that makes huge things possible in JS modules, object-oriented ideas like private data, almost all the cool functional programming stuff. So yeah, understanding how to see it and manage it, it's pretty much essential if you're serious about JavaScript.
All right, let's get into it. Where do we start? Rules.
Rules first. Rule number 1, closure is about functions, only functions. If there's no function instance involved, you're not dealing with closure, period.
Got it. Functions only. And you mentioned seeing it, observing it. What does that mean?
Right, the observational definition. What can we actually point to in the code and say, aha, closure? Well, 2 things need to happen. First, you got to invoke a function.
Okay, call a function. Makes sense.
But second, and this is key, that function has to be invoked in a completely different part of the scope chain from where you originally defined it.
Different branch.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I define function A inside function B, and then call A right there inside B, that's not closure.
Nope. That's just normal lexical scope doing its thing. Predictable lookup. You don't need closure for that, and you wouldn't really notice its specific effect.
We need that time travel aspect, the
Yeah.
persistence.
Exactly. We need to see that variable hanging around across time and sort of across different scope environments. Let's use the lookup student example from the book. It shows this really clearly.
Okay, walk us through it.
Sure. So you define an outer function, lookup student, and it takes an ID. Inside that function, you've got an array called students and the student ID variable from the parameter. Now, the really important part, lookup student returns an inner function. Let's call it greet student, and it takes a greeting.
Okay, so the outer function makes and gives back the inner function. And we call the outer one twice, maybe lookup student 6 and lookup student 112, and save those inner functions it returns into an array, maybe chosen students.
Perfect. Now, here's the crucial bit. Once those 2 calls to lookup student are finished, their jobs are done, right? Their execution context is popped off the stack.
Yeah, they're finished running.
So logically, the scope they created, the one holding the student's array, and that specific student ID for each call, that scope should be, cleaned up, gone. Ready for garbage collection, GC. Those variables should just vanish.
Wait, yeah. If the scope is gone, how can the inner function possibly work later? If I call, say, chosen students later on, shouldn't it just crash? Like reference error students is not defined.
But it doesn't crash. And that's because of closure. The inner function greet student, it knows it refers to those outer variables, student and student ID. That connection, that persistent link back to its birthplace variables, that's the closure.
Okay.
So what closure actually does is it keeps those specific outer variables alive in memory. They don't get garbage collected because the inner function instance, the one we saved in chosen students, still holds a reference, a link back to them.
So when I call chosen student 0 later,
it follows that link back, finds the student's array and the student ID, which was 6 in the first call, finding Sarah, and successfully returns, "Hello, Sarah." That success, the fact it didn't error out, that's your direct observation of closure. It kept the state alive.
Wow. Okay. That is kind of like magic. It holds on to its birth environment. And you mentioned even tiny functions like arrow functions.
Yeah. Even a little arrow function, say, if you used one inside greet student maybe passed to an array.find method, if that arrow function references students or student ID, then that specific arrow function instance holds the closure. It proves any function, no matter how small, can create and hold on to this state.
That ability to keep states separate for each instance, that sounds like the classic adder example, doesn't it?
Exactly, the canonical closure example. You define adder, which takes num1. Inside, it returns another function, add2, which takes num2 and returns num1 plus num2.
Right, so we call adder10 and save the result as add10 then we call adder42 and save that result as add40.
And why does this work separately? Because each time you call adder, you create a brand new, completely separate instance of the inner add2 function. And critically, each instance gets its own closure over its own specific num1 variable.
So add10 has a closure where num1 is forever 10, and add42 has a closure where num1 is 42. They don't interfere.
Precisely. When you call add 10 to 15, it uses its closed over 10 to give you 25. Add 42 to 8 uses its closed over 42 to give you 50. Totally independent, it hammers home. Closure is per instance of the function, not the definition itself. Run the definition twice, get two closures.
Okay, this instance thing is important, and it leads right into busting a big myth, right? People sometimes think closure takes, like, a photograph of the variable's value when the function is defined.
Yes, huge misconception. It's absolutely not a static snapshot. Closure is a live link. It preserves access to the actual variable itself, which means you can read it, sure, but you can also write to it. You can change it.
You can change the closed over variable from the inside function.
You absolutely can. Look at the make counter example. The inner function closes over a count variable initialized to 0.
Okay.
Every single time you call the returned function instance, say hits, it accesses that same closed over count, increments it, and returns the new value. So the first call gives 1, the next gives 2, then 3.
Because it's modifying the one count variable preserved by its closure. It's not resetting to 0 each time.
Exactly. It shows the live link in action. The variable is maintained and mutated across calls. And just to be super clear, the outer thing providing the scope doesn't even have to be a function. You could just use a regular block scope, declare a variable with let inside it, define a function inside that block that uses the let variable, and pass that function out. It still works.
So the function holds the closure over the block scoped variable too.
Yep. The rule is just inner function, using a variable from some outer scope, invoked somewhere else later.
Understanding this live link.
Yeah.
Okay, now the infamous loop problem makes more sense. The one with var.
Ah, yes, the classic trap. You write a for loop, like for I equals 0, I3 to I plus plus, and inside the loop, you create functions and save them, maybe in an array called keeps.
Yeah, you think you're saving 3 functions, one that should remember you as 0, one for 1, one for 2. Looks perfectly fine.
And then you call them later. Keeps 0, keeps 1, keeps 2, and they all return 3.
It's so confusing the first time. Why 3? Where does 0, 1, and 2 go?
It goes straight back to how var works. var has function scope, or global scope, if not in a function. So in that for loop, there's only one single I variable being created and updated. Just one.
Oh, right. It's not creating a new I each time through the loop.
Nope. So all 3 functions you created inside the loop, they all close over that exact same single shared I variable. By the time the loop finishes running, that shared I variable holds its final value, which is 3.
And when you call the functions later, they all look up that same shared I and find 3. Ouch.
Ouch indeed. So how do we fix it? We need separate variables for separate iterations.
Right. The old school manual way was to force a new scope inside the loop. Like immediately inside the loop body, you'd write let ji.
Exactly. Let creates a block scoped variable. So each time the loop runs, it creates a brand new j, copies the current value of I into it, and the function created in that iteration closes over that specific j.
So you get closures over 0, 1, and 2, as expected.
Yep. But thankfully, we don't need that manual step anymore. The modern clean fix is just use let in the loop header itself for let I war 0.
Ah, because let in a for loop header has that special behavior.
It does. The language spec says that using let or const in a for loop header automatically creates a new variable binding for I for each iteration of the loop. Problem solved elegantly and automatically.
That's much better. Okay, so now that we kind of get the mechanics, we probably see closure all over the place without thinking about it.
Absolutely. Think about Ajax calls. You might have a function lookup student record that takes an ID. Inside, you define an on-record callback function.
Okay.
Lookup student record kicks off the network request and then finishes. Its scope is gone. But much later, when the data comes back from the server, the on-record function gets called. How does it know which student ID the data belongs to?
Ah, closure. It closed over the student ID variable from the lookup student record scope way back when it was defined.
Precisely. Same with event handlers. You attach an onClick function to a button. Maybe that function needs to use a specific label that was passed into the setup function.
Hours later, someone clicks the button.
And the onClick function still has access to that original label variable thanks to closure, even though the setup function finished long ago.
Okay, let's nail down the definition again. The strict observable definition. What are the 3 conditions?
1, got to be a function involved.
Check.
2, that function has to reference at least one variable from an outer scope.
Makes sense.
And 3, the observable proof. It has to be invoked in a different scope branch from where those outer variables live. That's what demonstrates the persistence.
Got it. And just as useful is knowing what isn't closure, observably speaking.
Right. Calling a function in the same scope it was defined, just normal lexical scope.
Okay.
Accessing global variables, not closure. Globals are always available anyway.
Right.
Also, if an inner function could see an outer variable but just never actually uses it, no closure is formed over that specific variable. The engine can likely garbage collect it.
Okay, so unused variables aren't kept alive just because they're in the scope.
Correct. And finally, if you create an inner function that could form a closure, but you simply never call that inner function, well, you never observed the closure's effect, so for all practical purposes, it didn't matter.
Okay, so this link between closure and keeping variables alive,
Yeah.
that sounds like it has big implications for memory management and garbage collection.
Huge implications. Critically, a variable kept alive by closure will stay in memory as long as there is any reference anywhere in your program to the function instance that closes over it.
Whoa. So if I create a function, it closes over some big array, and I attach it as an event handler to a button.
And you never remove that event handler. Even if the button is hidden or removed from the page visually, that function instance still exists, referenced by the browser's event system. And because the function exists, the closure exists, and that big array it closed over, it stays in memory forever, or until the page unloads.
That sounds like a memory leak waiting to happen.
It's a classic source of memory leaks in long-running single-page apps. You have to be mindful of detaching handlers or otherwise breaking the reference chain when things are no longer needed, especially if they close over significant amounts of data.
Okay, that leads to a deep question. When a closure happens, does the JavaScript engine keep alive only the specific variables the inner function uses? Or does it keep the entire outer scope alive?
Yeah, the per variable versus per scope debate. Conceptually and for efficiency, we like to think it's per variable. Why keep stuff you don't need, right? But the implementation reality in many, maybe most JS engines is often closer to per scope. They tend to keep the whole scope object alive initially. Then, as an optimization step, they might try to prune out the variables within that scope that aren't actually referenced by any closures.
I dread. So it's optional. We can't rely on it.
Exactly. It's an optimization, not a guarantee. And sometimes the engine can't perform the optimization. Like, remember eval?
Oh yeah, the scope cheat.
Right. If the engine sees eval or used inside a function, it often has to assume the worst, that any variable in the surrounding scopes might be accessed dynamically. So it disables the optimization and is forced to keep the entire scope chain alive, just in case. Even variables the inner function clearly doesn't touch.
Yikes. So if I have a function that closes over a small variable, but that function lives inside another scope that holds a massive array.
And maybe you used eval somewhere. That massive array might be kept in memory unnecessarily by the closure, even though your inner function never uses it.
Okay, so what's the practical advice here?
Don't rely on the engine's optimization. Pretty much. If you have a variable inside an outer scope that holds a lot of data, and you know you won't need that data anymore after the outer function finishes, except maybe for smaller pieces held by closure, it's safer to manually clear out the big variable yourself. Like, set big array null right before the outer function returns.
Be explicit about releasing memory.
Exactly. Don't let it hang around accidentally just because it happens to share a scope with a variable that is needed by a closure.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, you mentioned earlier there's sort of an alternative way to think about closure, not the function moving and keeping a link back.
Yeah, it's more of an implementational perspective, maybe easier for some folks to visualize. Instead of thinking the function moves and carries its scope link, imagine the function instance itself kind of stays put. It stays right there in its original lexical environment with its connection to its scope chain intact.
Okay, so the function instance doesn't move.
What moves, or what gets passed around your program, is just a reference to that function instance, like a pointer. So in this model, closure isn't about the function carrying a backpack of variables. It's more just. the natural consequence of keeping a function instance alive via references. As long as some part of your program holds a reference to that function instance, the instance itself and its entire original scope environment is prevented from being garbage collected.
So the magic is just standard object referencing keeping things alive.
Pretty much. It relies only on standard reference behavior. The function instance stays alive because something points to it, and because the instance is alive, its connection to its birth scope is alive. Many find this model less, magical and more grounded in how references work generally.
Interesting. Two ways to picture the same outcome. Whether it's a link back home or the home never getting demolished, as long as the function is referenced. The result is the same, right? We get these benefits for organizing code.
Absolutely. The practical benefits are huge.
Like, first, efficiency, right? The closure lets the function remember stuff.
Yeah, remember data it calculated before configuration it was given, like the URL and data for an Ajax request and an event handler? It doesn't have to figure that stuff out or read it from the DOM every single time it's invoked. It just knows because it's closed over those values.
Saves work. And the other big one is encapsulation. Readability.
Definitely. By hiding implementation details or state variables inside the closure scope, we limit their exposure. This goes right back to Pohl principle of least exposure. The function you get back might be really simple to use because all the complex setup is tucked away inside the closure, inaccessible from the outside.
Makes the interface cleaner.
Much cleaner. And this encapsulation is really the foundation for more advanced patterns like modules or functional programming techniques like currying or partial application, where you create functions that sort of preload some arguments via closure for later use.
So, wrapping it up then. Closure. Yeah. It's this mechanism in JavaScript where an inner function maintains a live link back to the variables of its outer enclosing scope, even after that outer scope has finished executing.
Yep. It allows functions to be stateful, to remember things across invocations. It happens because the function instance itself keeps the necessary outer variables from being garbage collected.
We can observe it when a function is called in a different scope than where it was defined and successfully accesses those outer variables. And we need to be careful about memory, especially with loops using var, use let, and by manually clearing large unneeded variables within closed-over scopes.
And whether you think of it as the function carrying a link back or the function's environment persisting as long as the function is referenced, the benefits are clear. Efficiency through remembering, and encapsulation through hiding details.
Okay, so the final thought for you, the listener, to chew on.
Now that you really grasp how powerful closure is, how it makes variables persist potentially for a very long time, how does that fundamentally change how you think about designing functions? Especially functions that return other functions or behaviors. How does it impact your approach to managing memory in applications that might run for hours, days, or even weeks?
Something really important to consider for robust applications. Well, that's our deep dive into closure for today. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks everyone. See you next time.